important. And there's a quotation I only learned very recently. Richard Feynman was one of the most famous Nobel Prize-winning physicists in the 20th century. And he said, outside of science, the scientist is just as dumb as the next guy. And that's actually very important, because what we're facing is scientists making statements that are not science. You know, Carl Sagan, the famous astrophysicist, with his television series Cosmos, it starts with this statement: the cosmos is all that is, was, or ever shall be. Now that's a statement by a scientist, but it's not a statement of science. It's simply a statement of his metaphysical, naturalistic, atheistic belief. That's all it is. And it has no scientific authority. But the culture often leads us to think that if a scientist says something, then it must be true. Einstein actually got it right, I think, when he said the scientist is a poor philosopher. He was just pointing out that we need to be careful, and I need to be careful, because you're asking me questions that have nothing to do with mathematics. So I'm going outside my field. I'm very aware of it. But I do wish more people were aware of that. We're just ordinary people in that sense, responding to the evidence. So we need to demystify this huge authority that's given to people like Stephen Hawking, because when you investigate what they say on these topics, it is, well, nonsensical. Shall I give you an example of that?
Please.
Well, let me take you to the heart of this book, The Grand Design, which is a world bestseller. And I read right at the beginning this sentence, and I was just staggered. It went like this: because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. What? Now, here's the irony. Isaac Newton discovered the law of gravity and used it as an argument for God. What a wonderful God that does it that way. Because you see, he wasn't making the mistake of using God as an explanation instead of science. He was saying, look, we understand this now. Isn't it wonderful that God did it that way? Just like we, if we study engineering, we can admire a Rolls-Royce engine more than somebody who hasn't. We don't deny the existence of Rolls-Royce because or Henry Ford and so on. So here's Newton, and then centuries later, Stephen Hawking, who occupied the same chair in Cambridge as Isaac Newton, uses gravity not to believe in God. And of course that intrigued me. So I had a look at this statement. Because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. So let's analyze it just logically. You don't need to know any science for what's about to come. Because there is a law of gravity, because there is something, the universe can create itself out of nothing. Flat contradiction number one. It's just a sheer contradiction. Number two, because there is a law of gravity, not because there is gravity. But what would a law of gravity mean if there's no gravity for it to describe? And that opens a window on something that really is puzzling. How a scientist of his eminence can make the mistake of thinking that laws can produce anything. His first example of a law is the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. He doesn't appear to notice that that doesn't create the sun or the east or the west. It's simply a description of what these things do. Newton's laws of motion never moved a billiard ball in the history of the universe. People with cues do that. We've got a completely wrong-headed idea that the laws of nature create something. C.S. Lewis is the best at this, as usual. Do you remember the financial crisis? Maybe it didn't touch Singapore. Do you know why that happened? Partially because some people believe that mathematics can create money. They call it creative accounting. C.S. Lewis makes the point. 1 + 1 = 2. But you can add 1 and 1 and so on to all eternity. It'll never give you $2 if you haven't got $1 and $1 in the first place. Mathematics won't create anything. So here's Hawking falling into that. Worse now still, point number 3 is the universe can create itself. Well, if I say X creates Y, that roughly speaking means if you've got X, you'll get Y, yes? If I say X creates X, what does that mean? If you've got X, you'll get X. And what does that mean? Well, it means that nonsense remains nonsense even if scientists write it. So here's a sentence which is the key sentence of this book, which is 3 distinct levels of contradiction in it. That is very serious to my mind. And this is supposed to be a reason for getting rid of God. It's not even logical sense.